There's been a lot of wild crashes in NASCAR history, but there's a fascinating phenomenon that I've been looking into a lot. This is the idea of wild testing crashes. You could make a case that each one of these wrecks we're going to cover today are among the worst wrecks of the century, and most of them are relatively unknown. At the end of this video, we'll take a look at why these awful wrecks happened in testing and not actual race weekends. We'll start the list off with the most well-known of these wrecks, and that is Brad Keselowski's testing crash at Road Atlanta. Penske Racing attended a mid-season test in preparation for the upcoming race at Watkins Glen. Brad was approaching 155 miles per hour when he hit the brakes and his pedal hit the floor. There was no warning, so Brad traveled head-on into a wall that had no safer barrier. Brad posted pictures on Twitter showing a severely swollen left ankle and lacerations on the right ankle later that day. Later on, Brad would admit that he also felt extreme back pain at the moment of the crash and feared that he may have been paralyzed. If you haven't heard Brad's full account of the wreck, it's definitely worth checking out. The fear and hopelessness that he felt in that moment isn't something NASCAR drivers face much anymore. Luckily, Brad didn't miss any time from the Cup car and just 4 days later was able to pull off one of the most recent resilient performances we've ever seen. That weekend at Pocono, it was confirmed that Brad had suffered a broken ankle in the wreck. He would opt out of the nationwide race to recover and rest as much as possible. This way, he put his full attention to the Cup race. Despite this, Brad not only completed all 500 miles of the race, but he would take the checkered flag and earn his third career win. In 2002, 18-year-old Brian Vickers was racing for his own family-owned team part-time in the Busch Series. A week before the Rockingham race, they decided to test at the track to find some extra speed for race day. However, the test wouldn't go anything like they planned. Vickers blew a tire off turn 2 and started spinning to the outside wall. Brian tried to save the car, but ended up overcorrecting and putting the car into the wall at the worst possible angle. The car went airborne and tumbled down the backstretch several times before coming to a rest. At this point, most of the crew at the garage feared the worst. Why, you may ask? Just take a look at how demolished this car was. Really, the only car to face this much destruction that comes to my mind is Ryan Newman's 2020 Daytona 500 car. Brian Vickers' account of the crash itself paints an even more haunting picture. Vickers said that when he hit the wall, the car went straight up and cleared the fence. Once the car hit the ground, it flipped end over end and then barrel rolled. So a lot of people make fun of Vickers for his statement of the car clearing the fence, but he may genuinely believe he did. His perspective is obviously skewed because in a rotating, flipping car, his sense of speed, distance, and motion would have been way off. No matter what happened, something genuinely crazy had to have happened to damage a car like that. We may never again see a car this torn up outside of a super speedway race, and hopefully we never do. With this being a family-owned team, Brian's father was one of the first on the scene and believed he may have witnessed his own son's death, as well as many other close friends and family. Brian's dad admitted he had a lot of soul-searching and thinking after this wreck, which is understandable because he almost saw his teenage son lose his life. The team also avoided bringing the car back to the race shop just so his mom wouldn't see the damage to the car. Amazingly, Brian was uninjured from the wreck. After several mediocre seasons in the Busch Series, Shane Hall was forced to join a new startup team. Just a few weeks before the season started, the team decided to attend a test session at Las Vegas with both Winston Cup and Busch teams. Hall was in the middle of a run when his steering column failed. Without any way to control his car, Shane hit the outside wall of turn 2. The car then darted across the track directly towards the inside wall. Luckily, there was a tire barrier set up along the backstretch wall because of some road course racing earlier that week, which may have just saved his life. Still, once Shane's car made contact with the tires, his car was thrown into a tumble and rolled 5 or 6 times before finally coming to a rest. Looking at what's left of the car, it is hard to believe that Shane even lived. What's even crazier is that Shane tested the team's backup car the very next day. The hunk of metal left behind is not even recognizable as a NASCAR car, and it's truly amazing Shane was able to walk away from that. Unfortunately, Shane would only make one start with the team in 2000, as they DNQ'd 5 of the first 6 races. After the 2006 season, NASCAR held a Goodyear test at newly remodeled Las Vegas Motor Speedway to test new tires and compounds for 2007. Two of the drivers invited to the test were Kyle Busch and Greg Biffle. Biffle was driving at 204 miles per hour when one of his tires blew, causing him to hit the wall between turns 1 and 2. Details of what happened aren't very well documented, but in essence, Biffle was knocked unconscious while his car caught flames around him. Kyle Busch jumped out of his car and rushed to help Biffle out. He was able to get Biffle out of the car and to safety. This is just me assuming, but I believe Biffle was probably knocked unconscious momentarily and woke up in just a couple of seconds. I don't think that Kyle Busch undid his belts for him and dragged him out of the window from the burning car, but with that being said, Kyle very well may have saved Biffle's life that day. Initially, it was reported that Biffle had no injuries, however, this wasn't the case. I'm a firm believer that there probably would have been more than one death in our sport if it wouldn't have been for the safety stuff that came from Earnhardt's death. I know for a fact there is no possible way I would have survived that crash without what we have today. Greg Biffle said he suffered a dislocated right shoulder and had blurred vision for some time after the crash, a pretty good indication that he had a concussion. Despite having high praise for the safety of the car, Biffle had some strong words about the safety team. First of all, the response to the wreck itself was slow. I mean, if another driver has time to slow down from 200 miles per hour, get unstrapped, get out of the car, and then pull the other driver out, what was the medical team doing? Greg also pointed out how badly they misdiagnosed him. They did not even take him to the infield care center and instead just gave him a ride back to his team's trailer. Once Biffle got home, he immediately went to a doctor where he was diagnosed with a dislocated shoulder and a concussion, even saying that he shouldn't have been allowed to fly home because of his brain injury. Over a month later in preseason testing at Daytona, Biffle admitted to being nervous and battled soreness throughout the test. To explain why these crashes happen in testing and why we don't see crashes like these during race weekends, I first need to state the obvious. The obvious being that these are test sessions, so teams are testing new ideas, new parts, things like that. A lot of off-season tests are used to find loopholes or get ahead of the curve on new rule packages or new cars completely. Like any experiments, things can go wrong at a NASCAR test, and I'm sure that could be the explanation for countless part failures in testing, some of those failures which happened at the wrong time and caused crashes. Secondly, we don't realize how much time teams spent testing in the early 2000s, which is when most of these crashes occurred. Take a look at 2005 for example. Every Cup and Busch team was allowed 5 two-day tests and 4 single-day tests per car. Back then, Roush had 5 cars, so they were allowed 70 total days of testing between all of them. More than likely, Roush would have had several cars at the same test, so they didn't have to test literally 70 days of the year. Individual cars that had a rookie driver were allowed to have 7 two-day tests and 5 single-day tests, totaling 19 days. Additionally, new Cup and Busch teams, or those not scored in the top 45 in the previous year's final owner points standings, would receive 3 extra days of testing every single time they attempted to qualify for a race until they finally made one. So this explains why you would have 70 to 80 cars enter the Daytona 500. Dozens of these teams knew they didn't have a shot, but this provided them with even more testing. Plus they had a shot at making the big race. Small teams that had the money could have over 20 additional days of testing throughout the year. That is a wild amount of time considering there are so many part-time operations in both the Busch and Cup series at the time. Not to mention the testing rules were even more relaxed than previous years. This amount of sheer time spent at the track, combined with teams trying out new ideas, getting used to new cars or rule packages, and just normal driver errors, explains why testing crashes were so frequent and why some of them were so bad. I'm not going to pretend to know the exact numbers, but with 70 or so part-time and full-time operations in both the Busch Series and Cup Series running weeks of practice sessions throughout the year, it's not unlikely that half or maybe even over half of all NASCAR laps turned in 2005 were behind closed doors in private test sessions. Anyways guys, that's it for this video. I hope you did enjoy, and if you did, make sure you leave a like and subscribe, and make sure you leave a comment down below. And I will see you in the next one. Peace.